Coming up on Kizmet.
And she goes, remember the conversation 18 months ago where you said you'd leave when he finished? He finished yesterday. And I said, yes, I'm leaving on Monday.
Welcome to the Kizmet Podcast, where we explore your world of post-divorce reinvention, connection, and your pursuit of passion. Join us as we navigate love's second act. Welcome to the Kizmet Podcast, Life and Sex After Divorce. Today we're joined by Pred, a successful entrepreneur, and most notably for this conversation today, an ex-husband, who's bravely agreed to discuss his marriage breakdown and the journey that followed. His story is one of reinvention, resilience and hope. We'll explore his experiences of rebuilding life after years in a committed family unit, the emotional impact of dating, how his adult children responded, and spoiler alert, his decision to remarry. A bold and optimistic choice. Kudos to you. Welcome, Fred. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's married for less than a year, so yes, it was a bold choice, but still very happy.
Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that because we haven't caught up for a long time, so this is a new conversation for us, and I'm really excited to have it. Let's go back right to the beginning. We met in our early 20s. We were babies. And I was introduced to you through one of my great mates, and you later married her. And over time, we developed a friendship, and eventually our families became friends. You became friends with my husband, and our kids are kind of the same age. So we tracked along the same way. We spent Christmases and New Year's and holidays together, so we've got some great shared memories.
Some that we won't share.
Yeah, exactly. No names included. And when my marriage ended a bit before yours, and it was a difficult time, and I don't know that we interacted that much around that time. I think I remember speaking to Serena, your ex, around the time, and she really didn't know how to navigate a friendship with somebody who'd been divorced. And so, as happens in social circles, there can be a gender divide, husbands and wives. And to be honest, I wasn't really sure, or I didn't know that you and Terry had remained in contact. I didn't realise you had an independent friendship outside of the family unit. And one day, John, my son, was at Terry's house and the police arrived and they were doing a health check because Terry had inadvertently pressed the SOS on his phone, and apparently that's a mandatory check.
Yes, well, I think he actually had me as his SOS contact, which I was quite surprised at.
That's right. And so I was like, wow, John was surprised and I was surprised by that. So I realised that you guys had been in contact. And then, so one of the things I'm really interested in is the different narratives. I felt blindsided by Terry, and you as his friend, and I'm very interested in the different narratives. I've spoken to both my kids on this podcast, and even though historically the same thing happened to them, they've got very different feelings and narratives around what happened. And so Terry, as you know, has got some health issues, and that precludes him, because I would love to have him here on the podcast, but unfortunately he can't be. So I'm really interested in what you remember about our marriage breakdown from the side that you heard, which was not mine, because we weren't in contact.
Well, I do recall that point in time, and as I recall, obviously my ex was very close to you, so she connected with you. I sort of didn't really feel like taking sides, but from my point of view, it seemed to be that there was me sort of, I guess, connecting with Terry was going to create angst in your relationship with my ex, and so that's why I sort of didn't really publicise it that much. But I actually felt that you pulled away from me, if anything. So,
interesting.
And because I didn't see any reason to take sides. I don't see the point in that, although as you mentioned, it does seem to be the norm. So at the time, I felt that I didn't feel that there was any problem between us, but there was certainly a distance created, and that sort of continued then for a while. And then when my marriage broke down, it sort of went even further. I was very surprised to find you turned up to my wedding. So that was a complete shock.
Your recent wedding.
Yes. That's right. My recent wedding. That was a shock. It was a pleasant surprise. So good to see Terry's still full of tricks.
Very gracious. Very
I had no
gracious
problem
of
with
you.
that at all. And so, yeah, from my side, I sort of felt that you were the one that was pulling away. And obviously you probably have a different narrative yourself.
Yeah, look, I was invited to your wedding as a +1, and it was framed as something along the lines of, I've got a wedding I've been invited to, I'd like to join me. So Terry and I didn't speak for years, and now we're quite amicable, as often happens. You think you'll never speak again, that's it, hate each other's guts. And as with a lot of marriages, there's a reconnection. And so I said, whose wedding? And he said, yours. I'm like, I know. I introduced you guys. I've known Brent for a long, long time. And I asked if you're aware that I was coming to the wedding, and he said, yeah, absolutely, totally fine. So it was a blindside, and I realised it when I saw you, and I'm apologise.
No. It's funny, and I was very pleased to have you there. To be honest, so I was glad to have you there.
Thank you.
Terry asked me, "Can I bring a +1?" Of course, and I said, "Of course, the invitation says so." He just didn't tell me who that was.
Yes, me. And look, it was lovely to see your kids there. And so just to go back, what do you remember was the storyline around what did Terry say to you, or what was your understanding of how our marriage broke down or why it broke down?
Look, it was very little information was provided, and what was provided didn't really add up in my mind. It was some time ago, so probably the memory is a bit hazier, but it seemed to be that there was some argument that you had with your son, and you felt threatened, and that you pushed him out of the house, and as a result you got divorced. And I thought, well, that just doesn't add up. I'm sure there was much more to it than that.
Like with all marriages.
And because we hadn't sort of touched base, I'm very reluctant to hear one person's side of the story, and Terry never really gave me his side. And because we had sort of grown distant, I thought, well, I'm not really interested in hearing one side, because it's just, you're not going to get to the truth. Even if you hear both sides, you're not going to get to the truth.
Yeah,
anyways.
so true.
So it was, I had very little information there, but it seemed as though it was quite ugly as a lot of them are at the beginning. And I'm glad that, with time that they're more amicable. You guys are more amicable now.
Yeah. And so that leads me to you. I heard Serena's side, and I'm very interested in hearing the narration from you both and from your children. I've spoken to both my kids on this podcast, and like I said, historically the same things happen to them, but they have very different recollections and different narratives around it. So what do you remember about the time that your marriage broke down?
Oh, look...
and some hindsight now, because it's years down the track, right?
Okay. Hindsight is obviously there's no one party is completely to blame. If I'm being honest, I think that one of the issues when I met my ex, she was university qualified at a degree, very a high flyer in the corporate world, doing really, really well. And then my career took us overseas, and essentially she stopped working for the majority of our marriage, and I think in many ways she lost her identity through that. And I'm one of these guys that doesn't ask for help. I just do things. And I just felt in many ways I enabled her to sort of feel like everything that needed to be done I was doing. And in many ways she then lost her own confidence in doing it herself. And so as a lot of couples, that we focus very much on our children, and the children were the project. And then when the children grew up and finished school, you realise that, the initial connection that you haven't actually spent enough time in your own relationship to work it. And then when that common project has essentially ended, you sort of wonder, well, what's the next phase? And for me, I sort of had that realisation that we were there before my youngest son finished school. And I did actually say to Serena about a year and a half before he finished that as soon as he finished that I would be leaving, because I didn't really want to mess up his HSC and that side of it, and that would have been a selfish thing to do. So I held out that much longer, and I think it's a very common thing that you see marriages break up after the kids leave school, and I suspect it's for the same reasons. You spend so much focus on your children that you don't focus on the relationship. And
empty nest syndrome. That's
exactly.
A phrase for a
and
reason.
I saw this great quote the other day. It says that the best thing a man can do for his children is to love their mother.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's where, and we're both guilty of that. To what degree, it doesn't really matter.
It's true, and I think it's true for lots of couples. The empty nest syndrome is one of the reasons, divorce over 50 is on the increase. There's lots of reasons, but that's a significant one. And I remember it. John's school HSC day finished, and I think there were 3 couples that split up. They really were just waiting until the kids' HSC was done. And I'm wondering, how you navigate that, knowing that you're about to go. Like, how did you... do you still invest in the relationship? How do you navigate it?
You don't. You switch off. And ironically, that sort of last 18 months or so, there were much fewer arguments because there was nothing really to argue for in many ways.
You're not engaged.
And I remember the day that conversation that we had at that time where I said I was leaving, it was not raised for 18 months. It was not revisited. And I remember the day after AJ finished his HSC, we're actually having lunch down at the Opera Bar, and she goes, remember that conversation 18 months ago where you said you'd leave when he finished? He finished yesterday. And I said, yes, I'm leaving on Monday.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, we did do attempted therapy and couples therapy and so on for a little while, but fundamentally the decision, as I say, Elvis had left the building. so the decision had been made. The other thing I think for me was... I remember when I turned 50, a lot of friends said, "Oh, it's all downhill from now." It's all, and I thought about it. I thought, well, in Australia, the average man lives 81.2 years. Let's call it 80, round numbers. So 50 to 80 is 30 years, which is the same as 20 to 50. And I thought, think of all the things I've done since I was 20. I can do it all over again, but this time, have a little bit more money and a lot more brains, and it was, I guess, I saw that as my, an opportunity that, to find happiness. And I remember having that conversation with my children, and when my daughter asks me, "Why are you leaving?" I said, "Well, I'm just not happy, and I deserve to be happy." And her reply was, "Well, what about my happiness?"
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I don't think either of us, either Serena or I don't think we were happy, and I think a lot of people continue on that sort of journey just to sort of keep up appearances. And a lot of our friends were very surprised when we did make the announcement. But at the end of the day, I think both of us are happier now, both in our relationship with each other, although we don't sort of see each other that often, and also individually.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've raised some good points there. And I think the empty nest syndrome is a contributing factor to divorce on the increase over 50, but also longer life expectancy, exactly that. And I think you articulated it really well. I'm living for longer. Do I want to live this same life? What is there? And you said you went to therapy, and, as I've said, I've heard there's always lots of sides. There's the tradesman side who gets to keep the tradesman.
Yes,
right?
That's right. Oh, okay.
There's lots of sides to a divorce. I recall that Serena felt more blindsided, and she thought there was kind of like infidelity. Maybe.
The only item was that about a month before that, about 2 months before that day, when AJ finished his HSC, I did start a relationship with someone else because I saw the finish line, and I remember it was a very strange thing to say on a first date, but it was like, in 64 days from now, I'm leaving.
So you're literally counting the days.
I was literally counting the days. And with the benefit of hindsight, that was a stupid thing to do on my part, because had that infidelity been discovered at that point in time when my son was just about to start his HSC, it would have been the worst possible timing of all.
Yeah, true that.
So
actually.
that was a major error on my part from that perspective. I didn't see it as I didn't see it as infidelity because although we were technically married, I told her 18 months earlier that things were over.
Do you think that sunk in? Sorry, I'm interrupting, but you've mentioned a couple of times.
I found it strange that the conversation was never revisited, and I remember exactly saying my specific words were, I don't use this word very often, I said, "This marriage is perfunctory. We're just going through the motions. There's no affection. There's no, it's just a process. It's like a business arrangement to raise these 2 children, and I wanted more than that. That wasn't enough for me, and I don't think that's enough for anyone really."
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, some people, some marriages do, and you can see them. You know, they're easily identifiable, the people that are, to use your word, staying together for reasons other than the relationship, which also leads into, you know, the importance of investing in your relationship along the way. And so when you said just now that there was an affair that started a couple of months, but it would have been terrible if it was discovered. So it wasn't discovered, it was clandestine?
It wasn't discovered until after the sort of separation and so on. So yeah, it wasn't discovered. With hindsight, even though obviously as I literally was counting down the days, had it been discovered, it would have been terrible.
Catastrophic.
So, I do regret that element of it.
Yeah.
And more of the potential impact on my son from that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they didn't find out. And were you preparing in that time? I mean, you were counting down the days. So were you financially preparing? Were you preparing the family, the kids? How did that look?
Not really. I didn't. I mean, I was. I didn't use that time to try and, I guess, set myself up in to take a financial benefit out of it, because I sort of felt, well, you know, we contributed equally to the marriage, even though I may have been working. She was at home, so I thought, you know, the pie gets sliced in half. So it didn't end up that way, but
How did it end up?
I don't think I'd really like to say that without sort of Serena's knowledge, but she did get more of the pie than me. I will say that, but you know, keep saying with the benefit of hindsight, she'll regret hearing this. I would have given her 100%, based on, you know, the life I had after that, the freedom I had after that.
So tell me about that. What changed? So you were at the Opera House. You said, "I'm leaving on Monday." Is that what happened?
No, it wasn't what happened. For the first time ever, she said, "Look, it's all my fault, and you know, a few things I need to address, which we discussed many times." And she said, "Give me 6 months." I said, "I'll give you 3 months." In the end, it was actually about 9 months later that I physically moved out of the house. We did in our home, we had a separate sort of apartment attached to our home, and I sort of moved into there a couple of months later. After that, you know, we moved out, and it was... You
moved out?
Yeah.
Or you all moved out?
No, I moved out. We stayed there until the house was sold. The children stayed with her. They, because I was the instigator, they, really took it out on me, I felt. I remember I trying to get one night a dinner with them one night a week, and seeing my daughter sitting there with looking at a watch, thinking, you know, she's going to do this for 120 minutes, and she's sort of counting down the minutes before she goes. But anyway, that turned around,
How did you turn that around?
The big turnaround actually was more by coincidence when we were selling the property, and they were spending most of the time with their mother. And I said, "Well, look, it makes sense if they stay with me, so that nobody's using all the bedrooms, the bathrooms. So in terms of staging the property, it's going to be so much easier." So they stayed with me pretty much full time for about 4 weeks of the campaign, and after those 4 weeks, they realised that I wasn't the monster that
you were the dad that they
thought,
always knew.
Yeah, and I remember when the breakup happened, my daughter said to me, "You know, you doing this, you're clearly not the man I thought you were," which the kids know where to hurt you.
Yeah.
They know where your soft spots are, because I was a very committed father, I felt, and so that hurt. But in the end, spending that time with them continually, I think that was the deciding factor that turned it around. And then after that, I couldn't even get them to leave one night to visit their mother, because I say, "You know, your mother's missing. You should see her." And they were like, "No, Dad, you just want to bring girls home."
And so
they were right.
And was that true? Yeah,
exactly. It was.
So what was that like, getting back after you? I mean, your marriage was 25.
Almost 25 years.
Yeah,
yes.
25 years.
Look, it was a little bit daunting at the beginning. My sort of motto was, I went in there without any expectations, but without any limitations. I mean, there was no way on earth I was going to get married again, completely.
Really?
Oh, look, I told my friends, said, you know, I thought, no way, why would I do that? So that was completely off the table. But in terms of no limitations, I thought, well, if I find someone that, you know, I spend the rest of my days with, that's great. That's not necessarily what I was looking for. And some of the relationships I had lasted a few dates, some lasted, you know, up to 18 months. And they ended when things essentially just fizzled out for whatever reason. So that's the attitude that I had, and it worked quite well.
Yeah, and look, people at our age, after a marriage, date for different reasons. Some, people they're so used to being in a family unit, they want to be with somebody, they don't want to be single. And I think that's really important to actually spend time on your own and understand what you do want, which it sounds like you did to a certain extent. And we all know, because I've already said you remarried, so I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to talk about, you were dating, a couple of dates, or then for a few months. Your kids were living with you a lot of the time. Kids were living with me. How did they cope?
And look, and some people, some of my friends in a similar situation wouldn't introduce anyone until they'd been with them for a while. And I thought, I was very wary of that, because I thought if I did eventually introduce my kids to someone, they're going to think, oh, wow, this is going to be my new stepmum. And I didn't want to think everyone's serious. So obviously when you start dating, you sort of start dating a couple of people at the beginning to sort of, see which ones you sort of more compatible with. And so sometimes my kids would see, 2 different people in a day.
Oh, whoa.
But I don't want them to know that it wasn't, it doesn't necessarily mean that was serious. Just because I'm going out to lunch with someone, it doesn't mean, or a dinner, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily serious. So I didn't hide that from them. And I remember once they said, you're not in your 20s, Dad. I thought, I never dated this much in my 20s. I was never doing so well. But I think one of the things I've found is that, well, from what I hear, that the real disasters happen is when people don't have that time for themselves. And they start dating, and the first thing they want to talk about is how their marriage broke down and what happened, and talk about all their baggage. And everyone's got baggage. Everyone has baggage of one form or another.
It's a red flag if somebody's our age and says they don't have baggage.
Well, that's baggage in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So yeah. I mean, I think I sort of thought, I hear all these stories, and the underlying theme that I think is mainly with guys, I think, is that they think that they air all their dirty laundry at the beginning and looking for someone to really vent to rather than someone to actually date.
Well, then they need a therapist.
Well, that's right.
Or a really good friend.
So they're going on these online dating to try to get a free therapist. It doesn't really work that way. And if that's where you're at, you're not ready for it.
Yeah, true. So you felt like you were ready.
I was ready before the marriage broke up for various reasons, but I was ready, and so I went out there open mind and think, okay, what you got to do is out there you got to meet a new person. And it seems like if you were out in a social setting with somebody, you wouldn't all of a sudden say, oh, do you know what my ex did and my divorce? You wouldn't do that in a social setting. So why would you do it on a one-on-one with someone you've just met? Yeah,
true. And look, that's about recovery and also standing in your own power. And the dating that you did, it sounds like you were ready for it. Did you have the conversation with your kids, or was it just, this is what's happening?
Well, it was this is what's happening. And for a long time, as I said, they weren't, even though they had a room at my place, they weren't really staying there. Mm-hmm. And so...
but then they were.
But so I'd already sort of started dating, and I told them that I was dating a few people, and, They didn't ask too many questions. The main question they had was the age of the person, and so which I thought was an interesting one. But
because I think you mentioned, because we spoke very briefly about meeting to do this, and without very much information exchange at all, but you came out with a couple of pearlers, and I think one of them was along the lines that you took a date along and she was around about the kid's age, something like that.
Yeah, that's right. She was so funny. And I think it was on our second date, and she's only a few years older than my daughter, and she walks and goes, "Hey guys, I'm your new stepmom."
Oh.
And I thought it was funny. They obviously didn't see the funny side.
No,
of it.
Can't imagine.
So so she had a very sort of sarcastic sense of humour, which I really liked. But that didn't last very long after that. It didn't work. And there's a danger ones where I found women in their late 30s typically, they see sometimes you're the last chance of having children sometimes. So there were obstacles there. But I know, look, I typically did date younger women. not, that one that I mentioned earlier, she was, exceptionally younger. But
so did you filter on your apps? What were your filters?
my filters,
you're mid-50s, right? We're similar age.
No, yeah. I had no age filter in that sense, but I did actually read the profile.
Oh, okay.
So obviously at the beginning you just see a picture and you swipe, but then you read the profile.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I know, one of my friend's wives asked me this, about a year or so ago, and she was teasing me for dating younger women typically, and I asked her, well, do you know why I typically date younger women? And she was like, oh, it's obvious, because gravity hasn't taken hold and everything's sort of perky and so on. And I said, look, that's all really, really nice, and this is a generalisation, okay, so it doesn't apply to everyone.
Yep.
But the main thing I found is that I'm 57, okay, so a woman in her late 30s, early 40s, they still have dreams, they still have aspirations, they have optimism, there's stuff that they want to do. Whereas, typically, I said generalisation, so, I'm not saying this applies to everyone. Typically, women in their sort of mid-50s are looking to how they head out into pasture and so on. And that's not who I am. I mean, I've just started 2 new businesses in the last year.
I'm the exception.
Yeah, well, it's that optimism and that, so even at my age, when most of my friends are probably looking to how much more golf they can play, I've started 2 new businesses on top of all the businesses I have already. So for me, it's that, that optimism, that growth, that progress. And so, typically women in their sort of 30s and 40s had that optimism, and that's what I found most attractive. Mm-hmm. And the other bits, okay, that was like the icing, but that wasn't really what kept you going.
Interesting, and that's a very nuanced difference and important, obviously, for you. Then leading into meeting somebody who I'm not sure of the age difference between. It's not really relevant. Yeah. But so how you were dating and then thinking I'm never going to get married, and then what happened?
Well, I mean, she was fantastic. I mean, when I started.
So did you meet on an app?
No, you met her online on an app, and there was another girl that I met at the same time, and this other woman, for me, physically, if I had to draw the perfect physical specimen of a woman, it would be her. She master's, doctor's degree, no children, and so on. Absolutely stunningly gorgeous, and one of the ugliest people I've ever met in my life. Inside, she was just
so interesting.
She was just, and no amount of outer beauty could mask what was underneath. And for that reason, I won't mention her name, obviously. But yeah, it was just toxic, and the woman I married was the absolute opposite, absolute sweetheart with as an autistic son, a lot of challenges in her life. She was essentially an orphan, has no family. It can be baggage, it can be a good thing as well. And it was, as I said, with all the other sort of relationships I had, we started dating and, just to see where it would go, and we just kept getting better and better and better and better. And it's like at one stage, I thought, wow, you reconsider things. And I remember one day she had we were at doctor's surgery, and she had a medical episode, and we called the ambulance, and I actually thought I was going to lose her there. Oh. And the way I felt that moment made me clear that, she was the one for me. That sort of, we were already engaged at that time, and I thought, I just couldn't imagine my life without her. So, very happy.
Oh, I'm so pleased and very gracious. As I said, I met your wife at your wedding and that was a happy day, and your kids were part of the bridal party. What's different for you this time around? You don't have kids together, so that's definitely a major difference and something that affected your first marriage. And so what are the other things that are different for you now?
Personally, 2022 was a massive growth year for me personally. I really, it sounds smug, but I sort of figured out a lot of shit about myself and sort of figured out the meaning of life, sort of, for me anyway. And what changed for me was that things became very, very sort of black or white for me. So, for example, lying. So, truth was obviously honesty was important. So even a white lie, like, friends call you up for dinner and you don't really feel like going, instead of saying, oh, sorry, I'm feeling sick or this or that, I say, look, I'm really in a bad funk and I just bring the whole mood down if I come tonight, so I'm just going to please excuse myself. And things like that. So you don't have to think about excuses you've used in the past or stories that you made. And I think if I put everything in that sort of context of just the truth and what you believe and so on, I found it, in that context, I found it a lot easier to navigate through life. And so the relationship I have with my wife at the moment is the most honest relationship I've ever had with anyone. And she knows me better, and it's a terrible thing to say, but she knows me better after the almost 4 years we've been together now than my wife of 25 years.
Yeah,
Serena.
interesting. And it sounds like you know yourself better.
Well, and that's part of it. I've probably opened up a lot more.
Yeah.
I talk a lot more, But anyway.
I think the honesty part of it, there's an appeasement that you're trying to please others.
Yes.
And it sounds like you've taken that off the table and that you're accepted for who you are in this relationship.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And I think, I've sort of have a few sort of rules that that I sort of live by, and simple things like people worry about being judged, and we judge it when we are judged. Now, whether someone thinks you're good or bad, both are judgments.
Yeah.
Everyone focuses on that, but I sort of thought, well, actually, what's actually more important is not what is said, but who is actually saying it. If it's someone whose opinion you don't value, who has no integrity, then whether they say good or bad about you, obviously you still rather them say something
it's
nice.
It's engagement, which goes back to what you were saying about your first marriage. There was a disengagement, the lack of connection. And I think it's, for me, the same line. What my kids think about me is really important. What my really close friends and the people that I love is important to me, but really everyone else, I care, but not enough to change who I am. And with the different relationships that you have now and being as happy as you are, what's your relationship like with your ex? Is there...
Look, we do clash at times, and it's typically over the children and...
Who aren't really children ananymore.
No, they're adults, but in terms of, things in their life, and we do clash. They are rare in most parts where we're civil. In fact, it was just a few weeks ago, I think I told you I had a bit of an accident a couple of months ago, and I was in hospital and just reflecting on things, and I actually sent Serena a text saying, look, just hearing, contemplating, my navel and think about, our time together, and although there was a lot of shit, there were also some fantastic memories, and I want to thank you for that. And she replied saying, feeling the same way. So, in any marriage, no matter how it ends, there's got to be some good that keeps it going for so long.
Oh, absolutely. And we're just talking about respecting former partners and having these conversations, especially when you're so genuine and open, which I'm so grateful for. How... If your ex listens to this, what do you want her takeaway to be?
Well, I guess, as part of what you were saying, we had this sort of outer appearance of this perfect family. I don't want her to think that, I've sort of aired dirty laundry and that she feels embarrassed by any of that. I mean, and she may not even agree with some of those bits and pieces, but that is, my recollection and my truth, as you said. So it's just from that, because I don't want it to cause grief in that respect. I know when we were setting this up, I thought it was going to be more like life after divorce, not so much why did you get divorced.
Okay.
So I wasn't sort of expecting that side of it. I don't have a problem with it, but sometimes there are two stories there, and you should both stories. Sometimes I feel okay, I've given my story, but it seems a bit unfair that one side is heard and not the other.
Yeah.
If she's okay with it, that's fine, and whatever she says,
Like I said,
okay.
I'm going to be speaking to Serena and to Kartya, all on the record, but it's everyone's truths. And one of the reasons I did ask you about your marriage breakdown is I had no idea other than that one side. And I think it's really important, for whatever reason, to hear all the sides, the kids, the friends, but also one of the reasons I wanted to ask was because I'm interested in what your perception of my marriage breakdown was, because that was a blindside for me, and I've heard different things. Oh, there was all kinds of different things. Wanted to leave forever, or, because we live in a small community, things come back to me. And look, really, at the end of the day, none of that matters.
None of it matters.
We've all moved on and onwards and upwards, like I said.
The cause is not as important as the outcome.
Yeah.
And I know whenever something like that, something significant happens in your life, you just feel like it's Groundhog Day, every single person coming up and asking you. So I was very conscious. And also, as I said, I felt a little bit of a distance. You sort of, pulled away from me. And I thought it's because you knew that I was, sort of contacting Terry. And the last thing you want to do is come up and say, well, why did it happen? Because at the end of the day, does it really matter? I mean,
exactly.
if you
You've
found him, sacrificing a goat on an altar, like, okay, does that...
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter why it happened. What's more important is where is it going from now? What now? And you can never go forward by looking in the rearview mirror.
True. I'm asked, how do you feel about your marriage failing? I don't see it as a fail at all. I thought it was super successful, had a great family, and now we've moved on to different things. And, you've had this bad accident. I know it's probably uncomfortable for you sitting here today. You broke many bones, spent much time in hospital, and I'm so grateful that you're here and sharing that you've found somebody who completely understands you and that you're in a good, happy place. Mentally, physically, you've still got some healing to do. Yes. But thank you so much for coming today. It really means a lot.
Pleasure being here.
On the next episode of Kizmet.
My parents came out of it both as really different people, and it was weird to kind of have two people who were your parents not act like your parents anymore.
Don't miss an episode. Hit subscribe where you're getting this. Follow our socials and ask any questions on my new website, where we're building for like-minded people wanting to reconnect.